The floor is open for question and comments. If you could kindly identify yourself.
My name is Lakni Su from the School of Law, Singapore Management University. I have a question for Professor Koh and Ambassador Roy. I appreciate very much the analogies being drawn between the current crisis and that of the Great Depression. But one fundamental difference that I see between that era and the present is the presence of an organization called the WTO. What role, if any, do you think would considerations of violating rules of the WTO play in considering whether to bow to protectionist measures within the United States? That's the first question. My second question relates to some changes in legislation made in the last months of the Bush administration in relation to the investment screening system of the United States, known as the Exxon-Florio regime. The legislative changes introduced checks on possible curbs on investments by foreign government-related investors such as sovereign wealth funds. So if there's any information on what the likely views of the new administration would be in relation to such investments, I'd like to hear them very much. Thank you.
Can we have a division of labor? Maybe I will answer the question on WTO, and you do the foreign investment. Okay. I thank Professor Lakni Su, who's a very good friend, for two good questions. You're right. One fundamental difference between the 1930s and now is the existence of WTO. In fact, when the two houses of the United States Congress adopted the stimulus package that included a Buy American provision, American trading partners made very strong démarche in Washington to the White House that this is not consistent with the WTO's government procurement code. And it is also not consistent with bilateral trade agreements which the United States has entered into. And I think that this made an impact on the administration because, as State explained just now, in the final version that was signed into law, this has been qualified so that that the United States will honor its treaty obligations to WTO and to trading partners such as Singapore, Canada, Mexico. The other thing which I want to say is that the WTO's dispute settlement process is credible and it works, And this is really quite a miracle, because when you look at so many other treaties and international organizations, and you lament the fact that the dispute settlement procedures are not working as effectively. I mean, as an old law of the sea man, I know for a fact that there are differences and disputes between friendly countries and not so friendly countries over the interpretation and application of the Treaty on the Law of the Sea. And yet we are very reluctant to refer such differences to either the ICJ, to the International Tribunal, or to arbitration. And I'm so pleased that trade ministers and trade officials seem to have no hesitation when they have a trade dispute to say, let's bring it to WTO.
On that question, Ambassador Koh has basically made the same points that I would have made. The additional thing I would add is the danger is there are loopholes in the way the WTO defines these things. And the question is whether there are artful ways of drafting Buy American provisions that are designed to head off the types of challenges that would immediately be launched against the United States by our trading partners if we put in WTO illegal provisions. But there's no question that there's been focus on this question in Washington and a recognition that that's not a good direction to move in. On investments, it's too early to tell. We don't have a special trade representative. We don't have a Secretary of Commerce. We don't know how the Obama administration is going to address this question. But in any event, the action is not in the United States. It's in Australia. where we have the Chinese buying into Rio Tinto. They're also buying into a separate mineral company there. Australia now is front and center in terms of how they react to this question. Why do I mention that? Because if Australia decides that it wants to keep out these investments because they compromise Australia's control of its own resources, that's going to have a spin-off effect in the United States. Now, whether it will determine the U.S. approach is a separate question. It also depends partly on how China would structure an approach to trying to buy up assets in the United States. Is it presented as a way of keeping jobs or creating jobs in the United States, which it could be? If a company is about to go broke in the United States and China comes in as a white knight and keeps the factories open and keeps employing Americans, it could be presented in a way that could ameliorate a nationalistic response to the idea of foreigners coming in. When the Japanese came in, our close allies, there was a negative reaction in the United States until people realized that Rockefeller Center was going to be in New York, whether it belonged to Japan or belonged to Americans. The difference was whether it was operating successfully. And I think those same type of considerations may come into play, but it's too early to tell.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Schwartz, a Luce Scholar at Lee Kuan Yew. My question is addressed to Ambassador Roy concerning the term linkage, which was used by the Nixon administration, and his comments on using our good relationship with Asia as a linkage to accomplishing other parts of the global agenda that are less popular, such as climate change, or using UN representation of Asia, i.e., China and India and Japan being on the Security Council, as a bargaining chip in order to secure support for other elements of the agenda, like a secure Middle East or, for instance, climate commitments?
That's not the context in which I referred to the linkage. The linkage was in the specific context of whether Asian economies would be able to continue growth patterns independent of the downturn in the United States and the European economies. It's that linkage. There were very distinguished, like Marty Feldstein at Harvard, who thought that there was delinkage, and it's turned out there wasn't. Now, the concept of linking issues in Asia to other issues, that's bad foreign policy under any circumstances. People who try, the core of foreign policy normally is rationality, because it's based on the ability to persuade other people on how you want to do things. If you can't persuade them, you may end up in conflict, and diplomacy is designed to head off conflict. So if you link apples and oranges together, you are making diplomacy much more difficult. People think, for example, that China may be trying to link their approach to denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula to whether the United States behaves properly on Taiwan. It would be a disastrous approach for China to take that approach, and they haven't. Because China has a fundamental interest in a denuclearized Korean Peninsula. It also has a fundamental issue in Taiwan, but the two have to be handled in terms of the logic of each situation, and linking them together is only possible if you are such a dominant and irrational power that you can force improper linkages on other people because they're weak. Now, of course, the United States would never engage in that sort of behavior, even though people might suspect us of it. But under current circumstances, I don't see any likelihood that the United States would pursue that type of an approach.
Yes, sir. I was just referring to political linkage, not decoupling of the global economy.
I understand, but I think I've given you my view on the general idea. I do think that if you develop positive momentum in handling issues in one area, it suggests that you are skillful, and then it may positively impact on your ability to get support for dealing with issues in another area. But that's not linkage. That's what I would call a kind of sympathetic resonance.
Leverage?
It's not even leverage.
I think we have a more hard-headed colleague in Raja Mohan. Raja, you have a more...
I think it's linkage, coupling, leverage. I don't think it's that India or China are going to buy this kind of a connection that you want to establish. Because everyone knows the US has become weaker. And second, it's also quite clear. Take, for example, climate change. I mean, how much all of us would like to see actions. That the economic crisis has made it a lot more difficult for most countries to actually take major initiatives. That even in the United States, with the Democrats in power, you've seen a clear difference within the Democratic Party. Those states which have large industries, large labor force, those guys are not going to support this. While the lifestyle liberals might want to see this government do something, that it's going to be very difficult to get get it going in the United States, because the key question is who pays the cost. And once that comes in, at this point, it's become a lot more difficult. And second, as far as India is concerned, look, I mean, I don't want an empty check. That I don't see the US being able to deliver me a Security Council membership. Because even if they wanted to, I don't see how they can do it. So I would rather say, look, I don't want a check which I can't cash, so that I need to do something now.